Wrath of Angels. Chapter 5. Scene 1. Cold arrival. On the frozen shrine world Kharidan. Polar expanse near the Silent Spire. 4 months after the Vela reliquary collapse. Month 10, year 260, the 41st millennium. The world turned beneath the wrath like a dead pupil, a disk of ice veined with dark stress, glacial shelves thrusting toward a sky too pale to be honest. Vox returned no answers. Auspex bled snow. Where cities should have stood were only long mounds and ribs of buttress work half drowned in drift. On the night side, one spire pushed through the pack like a black splinter, stubborn against an aurora that wrote its slow scripture across the stratosphere. No hymns on the drop, no mortals aboard. This was an angel's errand, and the silence of it was a weight. Thunderhawks burned cold contrails over the pole and vanished into weather that had teeth. Snow scoured ceramite to a dullness in seconds. Frost chased along armor seams and settled there, turning prayer wax into brittle white scabs that flaked and returned, as if the storm were reminding them of a debt. Helm seals clicked in unison at launch, each a small, satisfying verdict. Some brothers swore they had felt watchers watching behind that verdict. But when the ramps dropped, there were only angels and the storm. The silent hunt led, black bikes sliding down an ice chute left by a carving shelf, engines throttled to a purr that sounded like patience. Kalen raised 2 fingers, and the column widened by the width of a hand. A breath later, he curled them, and the line drew back tight enough to pass in file between 2 wind-carved teeth of rock. Vaynar's Auspex murmured to itself, then to him. His replies were numbers, and the kind of words numbers respect. Tyrion rode a fraction off Kalen's left, blade flat across his thigh, with the calm of an answer already decided. Orath gave his throttle a single rude flourish that the storm ate, then killed the flourish at Kalen's glance. Celion's voice in the squad net bled clean as distilled water. Crosswinds heavy, intermittent cavities beneath the pack, hollow volumes. Echo returns irregular, then regular again. The ice is listening. Ride like it wants to, Kalen said, and meant both ice and world. Behind the hunt, the Emerald Vow stamped a shape into reality and made it law by standing there. The square formed and breathed, shifted weight, and reformed. Varrican paced inside the lozenge, palm brushing a pauldron here, a vambrace there. Sparrow-like touches that altered geometry in ways men feel before they understand. Malvern raised the banner, and its pole thrummed. 3 brothers leaned without looking, and the hum settled into a note that sounded like duty. Ephraim's litany scraped frost off his grill by sound alone, syllables accreting barbs until the prayer looked like something that could cut. Torvain set his heavy into its sling, and let the gun's weight argue with the wind until both agreed. Druvan marked the path, and the path obliged. To the right, the Oathbound of the Sanctum advanced at the speed of judgment. Dominiel carried Mortalis hooked over one shoulder, the flail head swinging like a censer built by a man who hated incense. The studs clicked against the haft with the slow punctuation of a thought that did not care to be hurried. Lutharian's shield was a door left ajar just enough for mercy to consider itself. Frost gathered on its boss and refused to acknowledge heat the way faith refuses to acknowledge doubt. Zephanis walked with a hunger in his gait, head cocked as if listening for an enemy that had not yet been born. Ramiel recited litanies so old they had worn smooth in the mouth and came out like weather. Abriath drew lines through air with his eyes, angles from causeway to buttress, path to ambush, drift to cover, and made a quiet inventory of where a man would die for forgetting any of it. They were not alone. Flanking the vow, moving in paired files, came the standard intercessor cadres, plain green, unadorned except where service would not be denied. They marched with a rhythm like the heart of a large animal asleep, unshowy, relentless, honest. Bolters held at the chest, muzzles down just enough to be polite to anyone who might have been in front of them, which was no one. Their anonymity was not neglect, it was a posture. Their names would be spoken later by men who had earned the right to remember. On the left saddle of the formation, heavy intercessors labored against the wind, with the pleased misery of men doing the difficult thing correctly. Ammo feeds clinked a metronome against thigh plates. They wore a breastplate's worth of ice before they had crossed 100 meters. It cracked and fell off in perfect parallels when they exhaled, then reformed, then fell again. Their muzzles tracked the horizon's knife edges and found no comfort there, and did not require any. Ahead, and to the right of the vow, assault intercessors could not help but be noisy even in silence. Chain teeth clicked in idle, a small, eager purr that turned to chastened hush when a gust threw white knives at their lenses. The men were not young, their impatience was. They made oaths in short breaths that smoked and froze and broke on their grills, oaths so many times repeated they had become a speed of the mouth rather than sentences. A few carried jump spurs, most trusted boots and anger. Above and a little behind, jump pack intercessors hung in the storm like caged meteors, igniters ticking with restrained fury. Helm lenses glowed as though someone had pushed coals into their eye sockets. Frost grew on jump housings in feathery fans. When the packs coughed a test burst, the feathers powdered into air with a sound like paper torn far away. They crossed the ice causeway in a hush, audible even through the gale. The only other sound was the world being displeased with them. Wind came in knives, snow hit like ground glass. The cold was not an absence of heat. It was a character with grievance. The hunt rode its grievance the way men ride a temperamental animal. The vow let it strike and absorbed it. The Oathbound walked through it as if it had already asked permission and been denied. The Silent Spire grew to meet them. A black tooth forced through the skull of the world. Its shadow lay across the pack, like a bruise made by a thumb that had not been gentle. As they drew near, the storm made a decision and parted. Not out of welcome, but as if the spire refused to share breath with the sky. The snow ran off in curtains to either side, and left a corridor of air that was colder by a whisper. Temperature dropped, the way a voice goes quiet to make you listen. Cavities in the spire hull, Salient said. Vaulted hollows. Reverberation suggests throat, not room. Noted, Kalen answered. Ride like it listens. The arch at the base of the spire had been gnawed into a grin by a wind that knew how to chew stone. At its threshold, the formations tightened by discipline rather than order. The standard intercessors closed files, 3 deep becoming 4, gaps knitting without creak. Heavy intercessors edged to flanks and rear like men taking corners in a game that did not allow corners. Assault intercessors slid forward in pairs, chain teeth cutting and stopping, hearts matching the stutter. Jump pack brethren settled to the ice with the heavy grace of machines that do not like to land unless someone they trust asks them. Varicon lifted his hand, and the vow flowed from square to lozenge and back to square in a 3-breath exercise in collective will, mapping the way the arch would want to swallow them. Malvern dipped the banner to clear the stone lip. Frost leapt from arch to cloth like vermin changing hosts. Ephraim rapped 2 knuckles on his own breastplate, and a sigil of ice cracked there in a sound like a tiny confession and slid away. The hunt slowed to a crawl, and then to something less. Engines idled to purr. Studded tires bit the ice with the little sound bones make when they crack, and cannot be bothered to complain about it. Vaynar lifted his auspex and then lowered it again, because his skin knew more about the air than the machine did. Tyrion's blade lay flatter across his thigh. Orath's hands stilled. They paused one heartbeat before crossing the mouth, and in that heartbeat memory added itself to ritual. The memory was of watchers gliding along the launch lines, parchment like winter leaves, wax like yellow fat between their small hands. Seals pressed and cooled, helm latches checked and checked again, no words spoken, consent taken as given. When the Crozius had tapped the deck, it had made the sound a judge makes at the end of an argument. The angels had liked that. The storm liked nothing. "On me," Kaelin said, and the bike slid into shadow like ink up a capillary. Inside, the cold altered. Outside, it had been hostile. Within the spire, it was offended. Light changed color without apology. Green entered everything. The stone, the frost, the air itself, as if the building had been built to remember a forest. Sound lagged. Bolt mechanisms clicked and returned as coughs. The harvesters among them had a moment of vertigo when their boots touched flagstone. The echo came back corrected, a half-beat late, as though the spire heard and disliked their rhythm and returned it improved. Columns rose with the posture of ribs. Vaulting ribs became, on second glance, something closer to throats. Frost had armored mosaics depicting saints whose faces had been revised by hands that wanted to be loyal but did not understand how. Eyes were overlarge, mouths overwide, teeth carved where no teeth should show. Banners in the nave hung stiff as ice, their greens gone to the color of drowned weeds. The storm hammered outside and could not get in. The cold inside needed no assistance. The Emerald Vow claimed the center aisle, shields up and muzzles low, the wall choosing its ground. The standard intercessors flowed around them in a U, flanks and rear framed by men whose virtues were steadiness and the willingness to be unspectacular. Heavy intercessors anchored the offshore angles where a rush would most like to happen. Assault brethren took the mouths of side aisles in pairs, chains idle but eager. Jump pack intercessors took the clerestory walk, boots on the stone parapet, jump housings tick-tick-ticking like muted insects, helm lenses raking the beams, the stained glass, the vaulting. The oathbound paused at the widening of the nave, anchors set by the simple decision not to be moved. Echo pattern irregular, Celion said. Then regular, then quiet. His voice was thin mercury again. This place wants to speak and hasn't decided about what. Let it decide, Abriath said, and his gaze wrote 2 new lines from nave to side cloister, naming where a man would stand to kill and where a man would stand to die if he thought killing would be easier than it was. Kaelin lifted his hand, and the hunt banked left past a cracked altar. Snow lay in a fake drift where wind could not have brought it. Gloves brushed it and found hoarfrost, not snow, creep growth from the stone itself, a bloom of salt-white crystals like mold that had learned the shape of winter. The bike slipped past pews petrified by cold into something more honest than wood. Breath, Varikan said. It was not an order. It was a gift. They breathed together. Frost plumed from grills in parallel lines. Helm lenses dimmed to cut glare. The storm outside announced itself as thudding born through stone. A quiver moved through the spire's bones like a thought changing its mind. Assault intercessors checked lanes again. Hands made signs on grips that the codex would recognize as hand speech and the chapter would recognize as superstition. A jump brother pressed a glove to the parapet and pulled it back with frost, lined across the palm, in a thorn wheel that looked like a sigil and then was only ice again. A heavy-armed brother at the rear stomped his boot down to seat his weight into stone. The stone accepted and made no comment. Vaulted void ahead, Celian said. Columns at regular intervals, irregularities at 2 and 5, throat-like narrowing beyond. Expect occlusion. Expect teeth, Orath said softly. And Kaelin did not reprimand him, because prophecy has its own manners. They made ready to enter the nave proper. The vow flowed forward by fours. The standard intercessors rolled with them like the idea of reinforcement. Heavies flexed their shoulders and felt their guns pull against slings in the comfortable way. Assault brethren vibrated the last of the impatience out of their wrists and let it tidy itself into discipline. Jump pack lenses all dropped 1 degree, a flock learning wind in the same second. The Oathbound remained where the room widened into a mouth and decided that if the building wanted to speak, it would have to say something worth hearing. The silent hunt ghosted up the central line, engines low, tire studs leaving neat dotted sermons on the frost. Kaelin raised his hand, and the line was a spear. He crooked 2 fingers, and it was a ladder. He flexed his wrist, and it was a snake. The men behind him understood as if they had known it before they were told. Vaynar muttered numbers, then stopped muttering and listened. Tyrion dipped his blade and brought it up again, a small acknowledgement to the cold. Orath smiled in a way that the storm could not take away. There was a moment, no longer than the time it takes a man to notice he is happy, when everything was aligned. The wall where it should be, the spear where it should be. The weight distributed the way a bridge distributes weight, so that men may pass without asking permission. In that moment, the Wrath's strike force looked like what it is, a thesis written in armor on the subject of inevitability. The spire disliked the thesis. Somewhere deep in the ice, a stress line breathed. Frost along the nearest mosaic lifted and subsided as if over a lung. The echo that had tailed them since the threshold, ash and blood, gate, forgive, came back on the next step, not as repetition but as correction, half a beat late, with the last words stretched until it began to fray. Absence is loud here, Celian said. Attend, Kaelin answered. They crossed the mouth of the Silent Spire as if stepping onto a tongue. The cold pressed its hands over their mouths and counted. The air tasted of iron and old parchment. The banners did not move. The storm had stopped trying to come in and was listening at the door. The angels moved anyway. The silent hunt slid into the nave's green hush. The emerald vow made a wall, and then made the idea of a wall. The Oathbound set their anchors, and the floor arranged itself around the decision. The standard intercessors became the color of the chapter. The heavy-armed brethren became the expected answer to questions no one had asked yet. The assault squads kept their weapons polite and their wrists rude. The jump pack brothers wore gravity like a coat they intended to take off at an impolite hour. No one spoke the word ambush. It would have been redundant. The spire would say it soon enough. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 5, Scene 1, Cold Arrival. Chapter 5, Scene 2 follows. Wrath of Angels, Chapter 5, Scene 2, The Fallen's Echoes. Inside the Silent Spire, nave of the frozen cathedral. Approximately 40 minutes after planetfall. Month 10, year 260, the 41st millennium. Inside the Silent Spire, the cold was not weather. It was an intention. It pressed against ceramite seals, like a hand over a mouth, weighed the warmth behind the lenses, listened to the thud of hearts with the patience of stone. Frost had colonized every surface and then dug trenches. Mosaics wore a milk-white armor that dulled saints into strangers. Banners hung rigid as coffins on their sides. Reliquaries had wept until their tear tracks froze into a jawline of glass fangs along the vaults. Sound returned untruthfully. A boot met flagstone, and the echo came back late and improved, as if the spire had heard your stride and decided to correct it. A bolt mechanism checked, and its ghost answered a half-throb, slower in a deeper voice. Words, when anyone risked them, disappeared into the ribs of the nave and re-emerged thinner, altered, as though a choir boy had repeated them from behind the walls. It was a silence with taste, and it liked discipline best. The strike force learned the new grammar as it moved. Standard intercessors took the flanks, 3 deep files sluicing around columns and pew stumps with the steadiness of a tide. Their optics combed the green air in overlapping arcs, left, center, right, back to left. The cadence was so ingrained they did not know they were doing it until the echoes began to mock them by counting along. A sergeant touched 2 fingers to a pauldron. Adjust. Another to a vambrace. Tighten, without breaking his own sightline. One brother tapped the same vambrace before each step, unconsciously marking time. When he noticed the echo tapping with him, a beat late, he stopped, and the echo carried on alone for 3 steps more. No one remarked upon it. He tightened his grip on his bolter until the knuckles of the glove creaked. Heavy intercessors posted at the mouths of side cloisters and at junctions where the floor's frost showed an old traffic pattern beneath. Polish where feet had come and gone centuries ago, now written over in ice. Their boots ground that crust into scree. Each time they braced to sight, their weapons hummed under restraint. Barrels immediately furred white from breath condensing. One set his muzzle on the shoulder of a frost-armored saint to steady the lane. The saint's face fell off under the weight in one clean plate and shattered on the flags. He did not move the gun. His squad mate's vox clicked once as if to comment, then thought better of it. Assault intercessors prowled ahead of the wall by habit and temperament, pairs and threes ghosting from pillar to pillar, chain teeth twitching. Once, a blade buzzed a single eager syllable, and the knave seized on it, returned it twice, higher and hungrier. Their sergeant's gauntlet thumped a helm with affection, disguised as rebuke. Jokes traveled along their short band like contraband, small, obscene, efficient. But the echoes took the punchlines and played them back in a child's voice, which killed the appetite for humor in a way admonitions never could. They shifted to vows instead, muttered and repeated until the words iced into hooks on their grills and snapped off. Jump pack intercessors owned the clerestory by right of momentum. Boots whispered along the parapets and rafters. Igniters gave a cough click every dozen steps to seat balance. Lenses raked green light off old glass. The saints in the windows had expressions that looked different from one angle to the next. An artist's sin or an ice distortion or neither. Movement, one voxed, flat and unafraid. Weapons lifted below. The stained glass looked back with a dozen eyes in a single face. A sigh of frost fell from a beam and shattered into chimes above the emerald vow. The jump brother corrected. Echo of movement. Delay irregular. He did not repeat himself because the knave would do that for him. The silent hunt threaded the central aisle. Engines settled into a purr that felt like a big animal pacing along inside the stone. Tire studs ground frost with a sound very close to tooth on bone. Kaelin's hand rose, and the hunt became a spear. He crooked 2 fingers, and it turned into a ladder. A twist of his wrist, and the shape became a coil that slid through pew stumps with indecent grace. Vaynar's auspex fluttered between full and empty returns, a heart behind a wall, sometimes there and sometimes not. Tyrion's blade lay across his thigh, with the patience of a clear solution. Orath gave the throttle one rude flourish. Kaelin looked. Orath's hands forgot about flourish. Cillian's voice bled into the net, clean, calm, and very far away. Residual reverberation. Cavities behave like lungs. echoes misalign, then correct. Pattern suggests an intention rehearsing itself. Kaelin's answer came like a shrug crafted into a word. Ride as if it's achieved. The emerald vow advanced in a lozenge that looked inevitable because it was. Varicon walked inside it with a conductor's hand, tapping a shoulder here, angling a shield there, drawing a breath from Malvin's banner, and letting that breath set the wall's chest. When the cloth dipped, frost ran up the shaft like vermin changing hosts, then stopped at the lion and receded, hissing. Ephraim's prayer came out of him harder than he meant. The syllables formed little spears of ice at his grill and snapped off when he inhaled again. Jorath's trigger finger shook once. Garen crushed it inside his gauntlet and released it. Druvan watched the frost at his feet the way a navigator watches the warp, as if the thing under him had opinions. The Oathbound set their anchors at the nave's widening, like men teaching a building its own load-bearing truths. Dominiel rolled Mortalis across his palm and let the flailhead drop once onto stone. The studs sparked and the sound refused to be amplified by the room, as if the spire had chosen not to repeat that particular word. Lutharian angled his shield by 1.5 degrees, a courtesy to claws yet to arrive. Zephynis breathed too fast because he could not help it. The breath steamed and turned to needles and fell. Ramiel started a litany and left it hanging in the air like a door left ajar. Abriath measured the nave with his gaze and drew lines from column to column, from aisle to balcony, from reliquary to blind corner, until the space was a diagram that any enemy stupid enough to become real would have to respect. They moved past a side cloister where saints stood waist-deep in drift. All the faces were wrong. Eyes doubled, eyelids too heavy, lips carved wide with teeth inside where none should show. Ephraim hissed between his own teeth, and frost made the hiss visible. Garen reached and broke a nose off with 2 fingers. It fell, a small, neat sound in a big, dishonest silence. "Save disgust for the living," Varicon said. The words were flat, but the wall heard them, and tightened by a subtle degree just the same. The cloister opened into a nave wider than the building's skin should have allowed. The vault was ribbed like a chest, the ribs dark with embedded frost that caught green light and made it seem that something moved behind the stone. In the center sat an altar split by cold and time. Across its cracked face lay a scroll case torn open, parchment unfurled and blackened at the edges where fire had begun and then been denied. Calibanite script crawled its surface in a hand that had pressed too hard, cutting fibers, desperate to make the ink count. Oaths began and never finished. Confessions leaned towards the precipice of admission and then stalled, each line ending in ragged loops. Zephynis moved to put his hand on it, hunger in his posture that was not entirely curiosity. Mortalis thudded down ahead of him, flailhead striking the altar with a noise like a verdict being recorded. "Not yours," Dominiel said. Zephynis turned his helm a fraction. He had a good grin. It sat badly in the green light. "Not yet," he said, and let the grin go. Salient scanners murmured, offended and interested. Residual vox echo in the ink. Unnatural. The words are written to be heard, not read. The intercessors around the periphery reacted with the honest variety of men doing their best in a bad church. A heavy intercessor turned his head, unreadable behind his grill, then went back to citing his lane, as if lanes were the only nouns he trusted. An assault intercessor muttered, "Cowards write on paper," which earned him a palm across the side of the helm from his sergeant, a correction that knocked frost off like dandruff. A jump-pack brother voxed from above in the clerestory, "Flickering glass at my 9, gone." His voice was steady, the room returned it shaky and higher, as if a younger version of him had found something to fear. The emerald vow took the altar into its geometry. Shields angled like overlapping incisors. Malvern settled the banner's point into a crack in the stone. Frost crept up and halted again at the lion, and retreated like a tide that had seen something it would not fight today. Ephraim pushed his prayer louder, and the echo brought it back meaner. Jorath leaned too close, and jerked back when the parchment hissed a word that might have been his name in a dialect he had never learned. Garen shoved him away with a gauntlet, not gently and not unkindly. Varikan bent to read without letting his armor creak. He consumed 2 lines, then a third, and then straightened and looked away as if someone had said something distasteful in a room where manners mattered. "Confession abandoned," he said. "They did not bring it to judgment. They left the judgment here to grow teeth." Dominiel tilted his helm a fraction toward the ceiling vault. "Then who judges?" The spire made a sound like the last stretch of ice breaking on a river. Not an answer. Celian again, the clean line of his voice sharpened by a data point he disliked. Echo strengthening, distances collapsing in returns. "This place is rehearsing us." Kaelin's hand rose, and the hunt throttled lower, the engines going from animal to idea. Tires whispered. The bikes spread into geometry, wheels angled to accept momentum that had not yet arrived. Abriath's vox carried no excitement, and therefore received attention. Ambush geometry. Lanes closing. Not faster, but narrower. Zephynis laughed once, a bright blade flash. Lutharian shifted his shield another degree, the kind of change you make when you know a blow is coming and wish to inconvenience it with minimal theatre. Ramiel picked up the abandoned litany and spoke it to the end. The echo hummed it back in a child's voice, 1 note higher, as if delighted by the rhyme. The parchment on the altar darkened at the edges. No flame. The last line writhed, ink breaking apart into smaller letters that became loops, then smaller loops, until there was only the impression of writing left like a wrong smell. Ephraim squared his shoulders and prayed over it as if raising a competing music. The room's echo came back with its child voice and made a duet of it. The duet did not sound pious. Standard intercessors shifted weight along the flanks. The spire's acoustics had begun to insert extra footsteps into their counts. An extra man on the left, an extra 2 on the right. Always a breath late. One squad did a quick silent head check by visor calc. The numbers matched, and the echoes did not. Their sergeant resisted the desire to put a round into the shadow that had chosen to be a man for half a heartbeat. Doctrine held his finger on the frame. Heavy intercessors at the rear angles found their fields of fire subtly distorting. Frost on the floor showed tracks that had never been there becoming older than theirs as they watched. Cross-hatching of boots and claws spreading like a memory that enjoyed lying. A heavy-armed brother lifted, took 2 steps to a better sightline. Set, did not ask permission from the saint he used as a rest this time. The saint's arm cracked and fell away. The muzzle did not wobble. Assault intercessors tried to bully the echoes into honesty. One took 3 quick steps into a side aisle, chain blade idling low as if that noise could be a torch. The aisle returned the sound brighter and thinner, and from behind him. When he turned, the sound stopped as if chastened. He came back to his pair without speaking. They all pretended not to have noticed his breath on the inside of his lens. Jump pack intercessors triangulated the clerestory and found a rhythm in the rafters, not made by their boots. It perched above them, moved when they moved, paused when they did, belonged to something with a patience they recognized. Shadow keeps our pace, one voxed, and the echo laughed it back at him with a lilt. The silent hunt worked the central aisle like calligraphers instructed to write a letter no one had asked for. Kaelin's signals passed from glove to machine to posture with the economy of a language that did not require verbs. Vaynar's returns had begun to stack, phantom atop phantom, raw feed becoming a palimpsest of truths and lies. Heartbeat, lost, regained, false beat at bearing 7-2. Correct, correct, wrong again. Salient, precise, offered the only real comfort numbers have. Vaulted void ahead, columns at regular intervals, irregularities at 2 and 5, throat-like narrowing beyond. Expect occlusion. Expect teeth, Orath said, and Kaelin let it stand because expectation properly set is a weapon. The emerald vow flexed the lozenge by a hand width and made space where there had been none. Varikan's palm brushed Malvin's pole, and the banner moved with the certainty of a tide following a moon. Druvan's boot ground an old set of prints into paste, heels too close together, stride too narrow, as if imitating a man with the appetite but not the hips. He did not mention it. He stepped again and erased the remainder. The Oathbound did not shift. Their stillness altered the room. Dominiel's gauntlet tightened, and Mortalis's chain whispered a different note. Zephanis' grin turned to something narrower that still counted as joy. Lutherian tested the boss of his shield with a knuckle out of habit, and the frost there refused to melt in courtesy, which made sense. Nothing in the spire had melted yet. Ramiel's voice found a deeper register that made the child echo give up on harmony and hum like a sulking throat. Abriath had drawn all the lines he could, and was now drawing the spaces between them. They approached the altar as if it were a mouth. "Read," Varikan said, not to a man but to the room. The word did not echo. It sank. Ephraim did. The script answered him like a dream, each letter swelling, splitting, reverting, as if the words had been written into the flesh of the parchment and wanted to get out. The confessor's Calibanite oaths slid into accusation in the space of a breath. I stood at the gate, but the gate did not stand. Another voice, his own, an octave up, replied over the top, and you did not hold it either. Jorath heard his name again, where no name was written. Garen's hand closed on the back of his gorget, pinched hard, reminded him where his spine belonged. "Enough," Varikan said. He did not raise his voice. Malvin rolled the cloth once around the pole, as if tidying the banner against a wind that wasn't blowing. Ephraim closed his prayer like a fist. Above, a jump-pack brother froze, only boots and balance, every muscle trained to stillness. Because a shape had moved where shapes did not belong. It perched among rafters it had not been invited to, and enjoyed the hospitality of shadow. "Contact probable," he voxed. "Clear story, patient." The echo came back. Clear story, patient in a child's lilt. His finger hovered on the trigger. Discipline was heavier than impulse. He bore it. Celian's voice had stopped being interested and become precise. Echoes now overlaying. Distances collapsing faster. "This place is collecting us." "Attend," Varikan said again, and the wall obeyed as a body. The parchment trembled without wind. The last discernible letters crawled together into a single word that did not belong to any alphabet Ephraim trusted, then broke apart into frost and ash. The frost on the floor lifted and fell as if over a lung, acknowledging breath. Kaelin raised his hand. The silent hunt coiled. Abriath lifted his chin as if scenting pressure. "Ambush geometry complete," he said. "The lanes are true now." Zephanis laughed once because he loved good work, whether it was his or the enemy's. Lutharian's shield angled the last degree it could. Ramiel spoke the end of the litany again, and this time the echo did not answer, because the spire had finished listening and had begun to decide. Under the flags, a stress line in the stone gave a little sigh. Something tapped behind the walls with the politeness of knuckles on a door. The vault exhaled. The Silent Spire had heard confession. It was ready to give absolution with teeth. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 5, Scene 2, The Fallen's Echoes. Chapter 5, Scene 3 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 5, Scene 3, The Ambush Unleashed, the Silent Spire, Central Nave, and lower crypts of Kharidan, moments after discovery of the Calibanite Confession Scroll. Month 10, Year 260, the 41st millennium. The first sign was not sight, but pressure. The floor flexed under boots, thin as a lie, and frost-crazed in hairline maps that pretended to be harmless. A tremor wandered through the nave, too low for the ear, exact for the bones. The building breathed, and the breath was not theirs. The second sign was sound. The spire inhaled and frost peeled from the mosaics in whispering skins. The echo that had paced their steps, ash and blood. Gate, forgive. Frayed and lengthened, the last word drawn until it lost meaning and kept intent. Varicon's palm tapped Malvin's banner pole in the old counting gesture. Kaelin's fingers cut a small angle in the air, and the silent hunt drifted half a lane left, half a lane right, aligning on a pulse no auspex could chart. Dominiel rolled mortalis. Studs kissed haft and spoke the quiet syllable before violence. The floor opened its throat. Pews dropped like teeth from a rotten jaw. Ice plates sheared away in staggered thunder, exposing a pale shaft ribbed by tunneling. Perfectly placed beneath the central aisle like a trick planned by geometry that hated hope. From that throat erupted bodies. Hormagaunt's first, a sheet of scything limbs and bright hunger, so fast their shadows couldn't keep up. Genestila's right behind, each one a decision made in flesh, claws rhymed by cold and not bothered by it. And from the high shadows, leapers uncoiled, springing out of clear stories and arch beams, with the clean, ugly joy of predators that never learned mercy. Lictors slid head down along columns, claws scratching neat grooves into stone, vanishing, reappearing, hunting for banners and throats. Banners overhead bellied with bodies behind them. Stitching split. Green cloth drooled chitin. A stained glass angel bowed outward and surrendered. Wings burst into razors. Fractured saints fell. From the hollow of light spilled thin, slick half-things that ran along glass as if gravity were a pinion. The nave's air went from cold to crowded. The angels answered. Standard intercessors on the flanks slammed into firing stances by reflex, bolters punching holes into the first wave until corpses became stairs. Brother Kenvar, glutton saint of the mess, the man who claimed the emperor blessed him with the stomach of two, fired too fast and at the right things, which is sometimes the last thing a man does correctly. A Genestila rode his muzzle flash and wrote a red gate from hip to breastbone. The squad hauled him 3 steps by the harness before Garen's voice welded their hands to their guns. Later, Brother Merrick stooped and tore Kenvar's brass company token free, closing his fist on it like a small, hot oath. Heavy intercessors planted feet and turned lanes into law. Brother Corvin, anchor, sighted along a cracked reliquary and stitched the right aisle in measured bursts, every third round burying a gaunt and teaching 3 behind it to trip. Brother Lyson's complaints made a backbeat, about jams, about cold, about gaunts that didn't respect cadence. His gun agreed with none of it and worked until it didn't. When Corvin's feet clicked empty, he swapped without flinch, stance unbroken, even as claws worried his greaves. When Lysan's jam came 1 round early, he swore like a priest correcting doctrine and vanished under knives. Corvin did not turn. Lanes are jealous gods. Assault intercessors lit teeth and turned the nave to a sawmill. Brother Teriel, sparring cage cantor and joyful nuisance, roared chapter verse while ripping a hormigaunt from throat to pelvis. The echo sent his hymn back in a child's lilt that didn't deserve the words. Brother Haelric, earnest and unwisely brave, took a leap ahead on and won, and took a second from the side, and lost, his death clean, his momentum obeyed by 3 brothers who made his corpse into a step. Their sergeant fought with jaw already loosing, eyes red with doctrine, until a scythe corrected his posture. The squad picked a new sergeant by the old method, follow the one still standing and let the rank catch up later. Jump pack intercessors seized height and discovered the spire resented the theft. Igniters coughed blue, stained glass steamed, saints wept color in long tears. Brother Venner, prank-born and incorrigible, dove hard and punched bolts into a skittering knot, landing heavy enough to pulp 3 outright. Brother Arios, quiet watcher of storms, banked off a vault rib and raked a leaper off a beam, then vanished sideways as 2 more met him in midair and made him a bridge. Brother Ilvan clipped a rafter, corrected twice, caution learned too well, and still found a leaper's jaws waiting at his landing. He shot the thing through the mouth with his pistol, like a man offering a rude opinion, and then sank under gaunts that had learned to become stairs. The Emerald Vow drew breath as one, and turned into a walking verdict. Shields overlapped. Muzzles spoke on Varican's count. Nothing spared to panic. Nothing paid to hope. Malvern set the banner, and Frost ran up the pole like vermin and stopped at the lion, abashed. Ephra's prayer filed its teeth on the grill and came back wrong. He doubled it, dared the room to sing along, and for a heartbeat the echo refused. Jorath's tremor tried to return and was smothered inside Garen's gauntlet. He fired on beat and hated himself exactly enough to improve. Druven stood where lanes ended and decided what belonged on the floor. The Silent Hunt wrote black script through the press. Kaelin's blade removed heads like wasteful punctuation. Orath slid a rear tire along a pew until it exploded into splinters that became a killing cloud. Tyrion rode a line logic denied. A claw drew sparks off his pauldron and received steel in the part of itself that thought. Vaynar counted like an auditor. 9 ahead, closing. 6 on the left rail, 2 above glass. Salion shaved meters into syllables. 12, 9, 6, 2. The hunt rode numbers until numbers bled. The Oathbound arrived as geology with an opinion. Dominiel's flail wrote a paragraph across ribs and pews and skulls, each impact an argument finished. Lutharian's shield took claws that believed themselves law and made corrections. Zephanis laughed once loudly, then lower, then not at all. He kept moving anyway because work is loyal when joy fails. Ramiel's mace came down on time, on target, with the certainty of thunder that has planned to strike that spot for a century. Abriath's voice divided the room into lanes and mistakes. Things that chose to be in the wrong place discovered they had chosen death. The swarm changed shape without pausing. Hormagaunts piled and became ramps for their betters. Genestealers learned the faces of the calm ones and went for the eyes behind lenses. Leapers haunted rafters like thoughts you can't pray away. Lictors drew exclamation marks where watchers blinked. The spire joined the killing. A vault rib sighed loose and came down like a jaw. It killed 3 gaunts and a brother whose only sin was believing the ceiling was furniture. Snow breathed out of a window that had been glass and was now geometry, glimmering in muzzle flare like powdered judgment. The echo in the arches clung to its favorite word and would not let it go. Unforgiven. Kaelin read the change before the numbers did. Left, he said, and the hunt curved like ink, finding the right stroke. Orath skimmed the cracked altar indecently. Tyrion matched his wheel to Orath's for the heartbeat, that means affectionate speed, and forced the arc tighter. They scythed a corridor. 2 standard intercessors fell into their wake and lived 3 more minutes because of it. Zephonis went too far, because talent and appetite are conspirators. He leapt a pew stump and landed inside a genestealer knot, delighted to receive him. The first turned his chain blade aside the way a boxer rolls a punch. The second found seam at his thigh. The third intended a throat. Dominiel shortened Mortalis like a man folding a letter and turned the third into fragments against the floor. Lutharian's shield denied the second. Abriath's voice arrived with the least necessary word. Now. It was now. On the right, heavy intercessors held until the concept became fiction. Hormagaunts learned to climb their dead like bad news. Lepers discovered the trick of treating a man's shoulder as a step. Corvin stood, shooting into mouths until his weapon seized for good. He tried to clear it with fingers that didn't obey in this cold, and kept trying until a genestealer helped him understand ending. Lisan died mid-reload, last complaint half-formed, the irony dull as a knife. Brother Prax braced a barrel on a broken saint and sang a monotone hymn of fire until the barrel glowed, then locked. He whispered, "Hold your lane," to a world that didn't know what lanes were and went forward to meet that ignorance personally. A lictor that had been patient made its choice. It slid through shadow, cut a vox line and a spine in the same movement, and the squad's channel became snow. Abriath altered the ledger. Lane 8, closed. He killed the punctuation that had closed it, and wrote in a replacement with his sword. Standard squads on the left performed the picture book withdrawal in a corridor, turning to teeth, rear man firing, sidestep, next man firing, until the picture book caught fire. A sergeant used a bolter butt as the old answer to a new face, and that worked as well as it always has. The man behind him stitched the offending shape into the wall, and that worked as well as it always will. They fell back, not shrinking, but translating. Above, the jump packs fought the part of the war written on beams. The Clearstree's dark produced leapers like roof leaks produced drips. Brother Venner saw one late, smiled anyway, and took it with him into the nave, both of them leaving art on the floor. Brother Arios's pack stuttered. He banked, recovered, and was removed from the conversation by claws that made him brief. A jump brother hung a second from a broken transom, one boot hooked. A lictor arrived where shadows stack and advised him downward with claws through hamstrings. He went, his pack spitting blue that made snow smoke. A standard below stepped into that incense and shot the lictor out of habit. The spire imposed new rules. Frost avalanched from ribs and didn't break until it hit. It buried gaunts and men in equal rudeness. A slab of ice knocked Brother Admon, mess hall singer, sideways. He rose and kept moving, hymn bit down, voice saved for air that wasn't teeth. A saint's face slid from its mounting and decapitated a Hormagaunt fancy enough to be offended. For a heartbeat, the building felt friendly by accident. "Hold," Varikan said, and the vow compacted into a lozenge tight as a fist. Shields overlapped until light couldn't decide which direction to go. Malvan's banner licked snow and lifted. Ephra's prayer bled into a roar. Jorath counted 4, 3, because numbers could be chewed and still be numbers. The wall walked forward as if digging itself out of a grave it didn't believe in. Peel left, Kalen voxed. The hunt obeyed, threading pew stumps, making lanes out of ruins. Salian's distances shortened to the word now. Vaynar fed him the only kindness data offers. Vestibule in 80 meters, 70, 60. There was a false reprieve. The vow hit a choke of fallen beams and set shields into a dome. The swarm shuddered against the iron blister and slid. Ephra's words climbed an octave, and the room, insulted, failed to mimic him. For 5 breaths, the only sound was gaunts dying on the rim and bolts working inside doctrine. In that quiet, Men discovered they were still men. Then the ceiling changed its mind. A second throat opened under the vow's left heel and vomited hormagaunts into their ankles. A leaper came through the dome's lightless crown like a thrown spear. The brief quiet burst like a prayer over a laugh. The wall flexed and did not break. Ramiel's mace answered the spear with a sound that pleased honest hearts. Zephynis stepped into the new mouth and made it regret learning words. Ambush geometry complete, Abriath said with mild satisfaction, as if the enemy had finally done their homework. Lanes are true now. True lanes are worse when they belong to the other side. Genestealers exploited angles a man's neck can't see. Leapers broke the idea of height into insults. Lictors tidied up the moments no one claimed. Brother Sorrel, cheerful cheat at regicide, tossed a spare magazine underhand to a stranger. The catch gave the man another 30 seconds, which is a kind of immortality when measured correctly. Sorrel died grinning because he had finally beaten the odds without cheating. The Oathbound refused to learn despair. Dominiel's flail-proved mass is a moral argument. Lutharian stood where doors are and made that a problem for those without keys. Zephynis killed and killed until killing bored him. And then he killed because boredom is not a right. Ramiel prevented errors in bulk. Abriath took 2 of his own predictions from the enemy and gave them back completed. The Emerald Vow flowed around ruin like water that has learned stone. Varakon's hand kept the beat. Druvan's blade made corrections. Ephraim's prayer stopped being words and became a rhythm men leaned on. Malvan let the banner list and write itself as if Seawind had found them. Jorath's count reached 0 and found a new number that kept being 0. Garen nodded at him once, and he began again. Discipline is a circle that eats its tail and lives. The silent hunt thinned the rightward crush that wanted to become a tide. Orath rode through a stand of frozen pennons and turned them into spears by being rude. Tyrion took his front wheel off the floor, long enough to decapitate something that believed in height. Vaynar's Auspex had given up on being honest and become useful. Celion's voice stayed exactly the same temperature as before, which is how some men help. Alictor found Malvan's banner and decided to be famous. It struck down the pole, claws sewing a ragged line in the cloth. The tear stopped at wax and script and lion, because some paint declines to acknowledge cause. Lutharian met the thing with the blunt syllable of his shield's boss. Zephynis argued with its throat. Ramiel placed a period. Malven rewrapped the cloth with one hand, while the other kept the pole alive. Varakon's palm landed on the steel, and the wall shifted to hide the mend, the way a body hides a wound from a predator. Brother Drennick, tidy ranges, quiet scolds, kicked a pair of spent cartridges into his pouch by reflex, then caught himself and grunted something impolite at his own habit. He fired 2 clean shots into a leaper that thought it was clever and made it ordinary. Brass later, he said to no one, and the echo returned. Brass later, like a promise it intended to hold them to. The floor kept trying to be a mouth. Hormagaunts poured from side throats that had the indecency to be beneath boots. The standard squads disciplined their panic into triangles, covered, dragged, advanced. A brother slipped on ichor and went to a knee. Another put a round into the gaunt that reached for his throat, and then another into the gaunt that learned from the first's failure. They became professionals at surviving the next 3 seconds. Vestibule in 50, Vaynar called. 43, 38. 40, Celion corrected, because a man should be allowed pride where it does not kill him. Above, Jump brothers cut igniters and dropped hard into pockets, pistols barking, then gunned back up through hands that wished to jail them. Brother Ilvan's fuel spluttered. He flared, drifted sideways, and hit the lip of the choir loft, boots scrabbling. A leper hit him mid-scrabble and used him for springboard. He fired once at the ceiling for the doctrine of it, and found gravity the better reader of sermons. He went where doctrine cannot follow, and no one wasted a round on his goodbye. The air itself grew teeth. Breath crystallized in helms and bit tongues. Frost formed thorn crowns around grill vents. The knave wanted them inside it forever, and had ideas about hospitality. The angels offered a different plan. "Break forward," Varikan said, and the vow did, each step a verdict passed on stone and swarm. "Hunt, cut a seam." The bikes carved. "Oathbound, hinge." The knights swung, frictionless as justice when it remembers to be brutal. There was no victory here. There was pressure traded for distance. A meter gained meant 3 brothers learned new shapes for pain. A lane cleared meant a lane elsewhere closed. Numbers were honest and indifferent. The false hope came back once more, smaller this time. Ephraim's prayer threaded a gap and returned unsullied. Men kept breathing. Then the roof's skin sighed again, and a snowfall of glass razors and ancient dust turned the aisle into a new problem. A leaper used the falling panes as steps, springing mid-shatter. Lutharian met it exactly where he was expected to, and hurt it with the delight of a craftsman. 20, Vaynar said. 15. The word vestibule began to look like air. The emerald vow passed the cracked altar and the scroll that had tried to make itself a sermon. The parchment smoked without fire, letters crawling and collapsing, as if ashamed to be read by living men. Jorath looked at it and didn't. Garen looked at him instead, and saved the moment from being a mistake. Brother Sorrel, regicide cheat, cheerful liar, took a cut across the ribs and laughed as if he'd been found out in a game. He shot the owner of the cut in both eyes and folded in stages, like a bad joke learning timing. Brother Merrick, who had pocketed Kenvar's brass, hammered a bolt into a genestealer at breath's length and felt the token press against his palm through the glove. He said nothing to no one and survived a second that wasn't his and kept it. 10, Celian said, and the number was a rope thrown to good swimmers. The silent hunt hit the vestibule first, because that is how stories should go. Kalen took a final inside angle that pretended not to exist, and made it exist by occupying it. Orath shouldered a frozen saint off its plinth with his bike, and used the falling body as an excuse for survival. Tyrion's rear tire skated on a plate of snow and pretended to be grace. It passed. Behind them the vow came in a lozenge-turned knife, Ephra's voice broken and stubborn, Jorath counting wrong and still counting. The standards poured in on either side, fragments of squads that still understood how to be a wall for a few more heartbeats. The Oathbound held the door between world and throat, and would continue to hold it until told to stop by doctrine that outranked doctrine, extraction. The spire was not finished speaking. The knave took another breath that forced men to stagger, and the horde poured into the volume they left, excited by the space and not particular about the blood. "Now," Varikan said, and the retreat began. Not rout, angels are not taught that shape. Not stroll, the room would have mocked it. But the exact pace at which men admit the future exists and intend to meet it alive. The cathedral screamed behind them. The echo finally learned a new word and wanted to try it. Unforgiven became unfinished. The angels agreed with both. They went for the light. The war followed with teeth. The Thunderhawks were coming. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 5, Scene 3, The Ambush Unleashed. Chapter 5, Scene 4 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 5, Scene 4, Fighting Withdrawal. The Silent Spire, northern vestibule to extraction zone, during the 6th hour of the Tyrannid onslaught, month 10, year 260, the 41st millennium. The knave remembered it had once been a mountain, and chose to move like one. Cracks ran up the vault like veins filling, ribs groaned, frost lifted and fell in skins, the way a giant's breath fogs and clears. The echo that had been a child's mockery gave up its game and stretched itself into a tight wire of a word, unforgiven, until even that snapped under the sound of claws. "On the line," Varikan said, and a line appeared because he said it. The Emerald Vow drew back 5 paces in a single inhalation, then 4, then 3, each step a squeezed treaty between drill and pressure. Shields overlapped, rims biting rims. Muzzles spoke by the count. Boot soles found purchase in slush made of ichor, ice, and old sanctity. Their retreat was not a collapse but a liturgy. They recited it with bone, plate, and powder. The silent hunt became a seam ripper. Kalen cut a corridor down the nave's left artery, as if the room were cloth and speed were a needle. Celian's distances flattened into drumbeats. 40, 37, 32, each number a rung on a ladder they meant to climb. Vaynar's counts clipped tighter, shaving seconds like a barber taking pride in neatness. Orath's laughter narrowed into a blade he kept clenched between his teeth. Tyrion's silence held the temperature of iron in January. Engines snarled, then purred, then snarled again in the precise cadence of throttles trained to think. The Oathbound made themselves a hinge with no patience for squeal. Dominiel shortened Mortalis to elbow and wrist. Punctuation delivered intimate and final. Lutharian's shield learned new dents and taught them to his shoulder with honest pain. A hairline crack ran across the boss like a question searching for a scholar. Zephani's grin burned down to a steady light. Ramiel's litany found a register that felt like stone being persuaded to endure. Abriath's calm voice mapped the air into lanes and closures and made the rest of the world follow the math or be called a liar. Around them, the intercessor cadres bled time into space. A standard squad on the left reversed in textbook order. Rear man firing, sidestep, next man firing. A human metronome with teeth. It worked until a Genestealer slid along the floor like a stain and found a gap before anyone else believed the gap was there. Brother Kenvar, who always ate double rations in the mess and said the Emperor had given him the stomach of 2 men, took the claw from groin to sternum with a small grunt and folded as if kneeling at a prayer he had not chosen. The squad dragged him 3 paces by the harness. The harness creaked, then gave. Garen's voice cut across their grief. "Leave him." Later, someone muttered that the servitors would save weight now, and the silence that followed cost more than the joke had ever been worth. Brother Merrick stooped without thinking and tore Kenva's company token from his gorget, polished brass stamped with a lion's head, and pressed it into his own pouch with a motion that said someone will remember. He would not speak of it later, but he would polish it in the dark. On the right, heavy intercessors who had been a wall were a reef now. Tide breaking and foaming over them, patience made claws. Brother Corvin, anchor, once carved tally lines into ammo crates while waiting for deployment. An honest man's defiance of time. He stood unyielding as Hormagaunts climbed him waist deep. His bolt feed clicked empty. He beat the next gaunt's face with his gun until the muzzle buried in meat. He drew his sidearm and made the remainder of his argument at breath's length. Someone else's claw found his back. He went down still pointing his weapon in the correct direction, which is more than most men manage at the end. Brother Laysan, the loud one, famous for recaf complaints delivered with zeal at any hour, swore at the jam that came 1 round early and was lost under scythes mid-reload. The mess would be quieter. No one wanted it to be. Another heavy, Brother Prax, who collected lost purity seals from firing ranges and stuck them back where they belonged, whether men noticed or not, took a scythe through the calf and went to one knee. He propped his weapon on a broken pew and fired until the barrel glowed, then until it seized, then until the recoil became nothing but the memory of recoil. "Hold your lane," he rasped to no one and everyone, and then the tide taught him what lanes mean to water. "Step," Varikan said. The vow stepped, shields breathing, banner steady. Malvin's cloth had a ragged gash bound with wax and scripture. The lion's device stared like a patient animal that had eaten worse. Ephraim's prayer collapsed into breath and breathed on. Jorath's trigger tremor attempted to return. Garen's gauntlet closed, and tremor decided to be useful elsewhere. Druvan ground a set of old prints, heels too close, stride too narrow, into paste with his heel, and erased the remainder of the story the floor had tried to tell. The wall took a pincer and answered with geometry. A squad on the vow's right knuckled shields into a chevron, shoulders straining, armor grating. A leaper hit the point with gymnastic contempt and bounced off Lutherian's shield, as if the metal had been insulted and decided to argue. Jaws snapped on ceramite. Ephraim shot it through the pallet, and the round ricocheted off the vault with a sound like a bell learning manners. Assault intercessors on center right paid Zeal's tithe. Brother Teriel, who loved to shout scripture during cage spars just to irritate his partners, fought 3 genestealers at once and might have won if a leper hadn't dropped from the clear street like bad punctuation. His chains had sang until the teeth broke. The song ended mid-word. The line felt thinner in a way no bolter could fix. Brother Haelric, earnest, reckless, first to arm a chain blade at rights and last to sleep, led a thrust to cover the wall's pivot. He died in 2 neat pieces, and one of his brothers muttered, "Always too quick to start, too slow to stop," and kept firing until his magazine rattled dry. Their sergeant fought with a jaw hanging loose and a spine deciding, killed 3, perhaps 4. Counting is vulgar while a man works. And then a scythe rewrote his posture. The squad appointed a new sergeant by the old method. Follow the one still standing, and don't ask him if he wants it. Half would live. The other half had done enough. Brother Admon, habitual singer in the mess, voice surprisingly gentle for a man built like a locker, caught the new sergeant's eye as they fell back. He mouthed a word that might have been here or now or yes, then turned and took a genestealer under the chin with his pistol like a hammer. Above, jump pack intercessors learned the building hated altitude. Brother Venner, prankster, painted his squad's insignia upside down on his jump pack once to see who noticed, was seized mid-arc by 2 leapers that used him like a handshake. He fell trailing bright fuel, and a laugh no one heard. Brother Arios, the quiet one who kept storm notes from Thunderhawk portholes, took 2 claws through the pauldron while banking and cartwheeled into darkness, his pack coughing a last blue sigh. Brother Ilvan, who always overcorrected his landings because he'd been told once that caution is cheap, clipped a rafter, ricocheted, and still managed to double-tap a leaper under him before a Hormagaunt pile swallowed his boots. He screamed, "Up!" at his own legs, which failed to be persuaded. The rafters cracked. A plate of ice dropped and took an assault brother across the shoulders. He staggered, knee through slush, and a genestealer finished the line of the sentence his death had begun. Another grabbed the body by the belts and used it to trample a lane. The Emerald Vow took that lane and made it law. The silent hunt opened a path to the vestibule and kept it open by being itself. Kalen rode the outer arc, reading pressure the way a surgeon reads pulse. Tyrion slipped knives of speed into impossible gaps. Orath shredded a saint's calves with his tires, just to hear the crash bury gaunts. Vaynar called the beat. Celion turned the beat into meters and seconds. The world accepted the conversion to avoid argument. Vestibule in 40, Celion voxed, voice like a taut string. 35, Vaynar followed, arithmetic done ahead of time. 30, Celion adjusted, a concession to optimism earned by skill. On the Vow's far left, Sergeant Drennick, collector of discarded cartridges, champion of tidy ranges, shouldered Brother Merrick aside and fired a measured double at a lictor that had mistaken the sergeant for a man who tolerated personal space. The creature's torso came apart in a grudging way. "Pick your brass later," Drennick snapped. "I'll haunt you if you don't." He meant it kindly and made it sound like an audit. The Oathbound held the hinge. Dominiel's gauntlet was glazed with frozen blood. Mortalis wiped itself clean on skulls every rotation. Lutharian's shield felt heavier than truth and truer than weight. Zephonis' laughter had become a quiet grin sharpened to hurt. Ramiel's voice dropped until the child echo sulked and gave up. Sometimes you can bore malice into obedience. Abriath counted. Meters, bodies, seconds. Deaths he could delay and deaths he could not. A lictor arrived late and correct. It slid along the wall like poured shadow, dissolved, reappeared behind a standard squad's vox bearer, lifted claws like an organist raising both hands, and cut cable and spine in one motion. The channel filled with white hiss and the echo's petty choir. Abriath took note the way accountants take notes. Lane 8 closed, he said, then stepped into it and reopened it with a cut so exact it could have been taught. The lictor tried to decide which half of itself should hate him more and lost interest. The spire decided to help. A vault rib shrieked and let go, dropping a jaw's worth of icicles onto friend and enemy with impartial rancor. A saint's face slid off in a sheet and shattered into sugar. Snow refilled the cracks with sincerity. The knave's throat pulsed, and everything in it tried to choke them. "Wall, halve," Varican said, and the vow split clean on the word. Two lips of iron pulling back from a passage that had not existed until obedience made it. Standard squads poured through the gap in disciplined panic, that special speed angels reserve for when truth has a schedule. Brother Sorrel, cheerful cheat at regicide, always losing with confidence, tossed his spare magazine to a stranger with the neat underhand of a man who has spent time throwing bones in mess corners. The stranger caught, fired, lived another 30 seconds because of it, a lifetime if you measure correctly. "Ramps," Celion said. It had relief in it, an apology for the relief. The storm answered with the physics of redemption. A thunderhawk shouldered wind aside, downwash hammering the vestibule into trenches. Its ramp punched into snow like a judge closing a case. The dorsal gun walked a crisp line across the nave and turned several hundred arguments into mist. Vox spike ripple, then lock. The craft's array bullied the weather into registering their reality. The downwash slapped angels to knee and spun tyrannids like ragged prayer flags. The smell of hot oil and ionized snow swept the place clean for a heartbeat before the dirt returned. "Emerald Vow, first hawk," Varican said with a lunch order tone that steadied men. "Standards fill behind." The wall pivoted, shepherding broken squads with the crook of geometry. Drennick was last through because he preferred clean floors to clean consciences. He reached for the ramp switch and hated the act of turning his back with a white, clean hatred he would remember if he had lived. He pressed the control. The ramp thought briefly about mercy, then started to rise. The silent hunt boarded next, bikes snarling up the incline like black beasts reluctant to cage. A leaper landed on Tyrion's saddle and made a suggestion about ownership. Tyrion's blade cut the suggestion into confetti. Orath put a bolt through the confetti out of a sense of completeness. Kaelin's rear wheel hopped on the lip, bit metal, and the bike purred as if happy in captivity. Salion broke from his mount in 3 strides and mated Auspex to shipmast with the delicacy of a man returning a hawk to perch. In the gun bay above, a servitor chattered a laugh that was probably a jam clearing. No one corrected its manners. Second hawk inbound, Celion added, calmer now, because numbers relax when machines talk to machines. The jump packs tried to land clean. One bounced off the vestibule arch and crawled the last meter with a pack coughing smoke. 2 Hormagaunts clamped his greaves like anchors and died to his ignition burst. The pack coughed, gutted, and died too. Another jump brother dropped, got halfway across the ramp, and a leaper's shadow knocked him sideways into a bay wall. He slid, leaving a bright smear he would not be available to apologize for later. Brother Venner's absence sat in the formation's voice like a missing rung on a ladder. No one mentioned it aloud, because no one could afford the breath. The assaults bled up the second ramp, 6 of 12, one carrying the snapped hilt of Brother Teriel's sword like a relic found in mud. Their new sergeant's jaw hung crooked, reset badly. He smiled anyway, because it annoyed pain to be ignored. Brother Admon paused half a step to wrench a saint's broken faceplate from a gaunt's claws. Not for you, and then threw it away because sentiment weighs more than ammunition. The heavies had 2 left. 1, helmet cracked, 1 optic blind, plates furred with impact-crazed ice, walked stiffly and sighted an imaginary lane as he boarded, finger twitching on a weapon no longer there. The other's pauldrons smoked where a bioacid splash had melted purity script into dark rivulets. He fumbled at the strap, Lisan's old habit of fixing everything before someone else had to do it, and then stopped, realizing there was no longer a second set of hands to help. Behind them on the nave floor, Brother Corvin's helmet had been kicked under an arch by the tide. The lion on its brow had a chip that looked intentional. Brother Lyson did not complain about the ramp's angle. The quiet was thicker for that. The standard cadres kept dying in tidy increments. A pair reached the lip and turned to cover. A bright bolt from a stolen human pistol took one across the grill. He fell backward into the bay with a sound that made 2 men flinch without permission. The other grabbed his harness on reflex, felt it snap, looked out into the vestibule where the man he had tried to save slid away like a package down a slope, and spent 2 rounds he could ill spare buying him a second he could not use. Garen pulled him inside with a tug that hurt both their shoulders. "Count," the sergeant said, and the brother did, because numbers are fences for panic. "Third hawk," Salion said. 30 seconds, half a minute, 2/3 of a half. It was humor so dry it might also have been stress. Either way, it made 2 men breathe out a laugh and breathe back discipline faster. The Oathbound were last by doctrine and habit and personal taste. "Rear," Abriath said, as if the word were written in their gene seed, and it may as well have been. They set themselves where the door had to be, and for a while it was. Dominiel's flail took a lictor that had been counting heartbeats and miscounted. The studs punched jurisprudence into its skull and left room for Zephonese to write punctuation below it. Lutherian put his shield where law requires a seal. Ramiel crushed 3 chests with 1 swing because the laws of impact had been correct today, and that pleased him. A last standard squad reached the ramp, a tattered banner of green without a pole. Their sergeant did a neat pivot to slap the control on the second hawk, and died with the act half finished. The brother behind him, who had served with him 9 years and had heard 9 years of mutters about waste in the ranges, finished the switch and felt the wrongness of doing it with the wrong hand. He would remember to pick up spent cartridges for a month after, then forget. Someone else would remember instead. The third Thunderhawk dropped and shoved the storm aside like a rude cousin. Its ramp hit snow with a declarative thud. Its dorsal mount swept the clearstream, a brief constellation of tracers stitched leapers into mist. A side sponson raked the nave's mid-level and turned a Genestealer pack into a wet signature on the wall. In the bay, men stumbled as downwash punched at them. Tie-down chains rattled. A deckhand servitor rotated its blank face toward the weather and clicked as if counting. "Rear 2 squads, Varikan said. Then knights. Kalen took the farmost slice into the third bay, turned the bike sideways on the lip as if dancing, boot skimming stone, blade low, just to keep elegance alive. Orath followed, tire-chewing chips from the ramp's edge, as if hungry. Tyrion came without comment, and took the angle that made anyone thinking of leaping into the bay re-evaluate their theology. Vaynar's voice counted. Celion's screens sang lies and truths, and the ship made their noise into safety. The last standard fragments arrived as pieces. A 3 with no sergeant, a 5 with a man missing half a leg and still firing, propped in the crook of the ramp rail as if furniture. A 2 carrying a third whose armor leaked black like a broken sensor. One jumped, rolled, came up to cover and met a claw through the grill. The second shot the creature off him, and then braced his brother's head where it lolled. He said, "Stay," and then hated himself for saying a thing that could not be obeyed. Brother Merrick pushed past, slammed a spare mag into the living man's weapon, and shoved him bodily into the bay with the briskness of a man tidying a shelf falling down. "Move," he said, and did not look to see if he had been thanked. "Oathbound," Abriath said at last, because Mercy had finished negotiating with facts. Dominiel backed 2 steps and 1 more. Zephynis reversed with a flourish that would have been showing off if a leaper hadn't picked that exact line to die on. Lutharian's shield met a Genestealer on the lip and reduced its momentum to etiquette. Ramiel swung one last time for comprehension. They boarded, not in haste, angels do not run, but in that faster-than-they-like pace that admits the existence of the future. A final lictor leapt from the smoke and drove into Malvin's banner. Cloth tore along a ragged claw path until it met Wax and the lion and stopped, because some paint was written as law. Lutharian introduced the creature to the deck with prejudice. Zephynis suggested a throat correction. Mortalis stamped approval. "Up," Varikan said, and 3 ramps rose together like sentences completing. Snow tried to follow. Snow was refused. The dorsal guns wrote brief horizontal epitaphs across the nave. The Thunderhawks shrugged the storm onto their wings and pulled the sky down into obedience. Below, the spire closed its throat, not delicately, with the immemorial violence of geology remembering itself. The hole that had been the hive's mouth sealed under plates of ice that had not been there, and now had always been there. The last visible bodies were scrubbed from sight by a gust that came from nowhere and went nowhere, as if the building had decided to swallow its own testimony. The echo died. The word unforgiven remained, not in air, but in the work left to do. Inside the bays, the sound changed register. The Wrath's atmosphere answered with metal and breath, and the clean cruelty of a forced draft. Angels stood where they had earned the right to stand, because the ramp had removed permission from the enemy. Helm seals hissed contamination rites in sequence. Servo arms descended with incense nobody wanted, and solvent everybody did. A Medici servitor found a jump brother laid out like a broken wing, and tried to be kind with a drill. Kindness looks like a drill on a ship that is also a monastery. Varicon planted the banner pole into the deck with a sound that satisfied more than it should. Malvin's hands were steady. Wax cracked along the gash and would have to be scraped and relaid. Ephraim's voice took 3 breaths to remember how loud it ought to be. Jorath leaned his helm against a bulkhead too long. Garen flicked the back of his head and left his hand there 1 heartbeat more than necessary. Druvan stood by the hatch and checked each brother who passed with a glance that was both inventory and benediction. Kalen wiped his blade on a cloth like a man cleaning an heirloom. Orath flexed his gauntlets, muttering something about recaf they would never argue over again. Tyrion stood by the ramp as if disappointed it had closed. Celion watched Data stitch ship to planet into one dishonest picture and disliked having to learn a new grammar. Vaynar unplugged, blinked, and reported nothing, as if that, finally, were a gift. The Oathbound stood like furniture that can bite. Dominiel turned Mortalis once. The studs ticked against his wrist guard in a sound like a funeral ring. Lutharion looked at his cracked shield and did not touch it. What is broken that still does its work gets to keep its secret. Zephanis chuckled, then stopped when no one answered. Joy was expensive here. Ramiel kept silence, having said enough. Abriath itemized the dead in his head, then the living, then the distance between those numbers and the next fight. Losses tallied in neat, brutal lines. Heavy intercessors. 2 living, 1 critical. The rest already the Gene Vault's grim work. Assaults. Half lost. The remainder bleeding in interesting ways. Jump packs. A third aloft, a third grounded forever, a third in between. Standards. Fragments. Squads made of tatters and will. The triad. Intact, bloodied, unbowed, carrying the memory like an extra plate. Someone placed Brother Teriel's broken chainsword hilt on a crate, teeth missing, oil dark in the cracks. Brother Corvin's tally knife lay beside it, its last mark unfinished. Brother Lyson's tin cup, dented at the lip where he'd clicked it against mess trays to demand hotter recaf, clinked as the ship hit a pocket of turbulence, and then went still. Brother Venner's upside-down insignia plate, fished from a jump harness by a grim jump sergeant who wouldn't say how, sat face down, the joke finally right way up, only because no one had the heart to turn it. Through hull and storm, the spire sent no more echoes. It had told its story. The swarm kept telling its own, but lacked a tongue now that the angels had taken theirs away for the day. Count, Varikan said, and a dozen voices answered in tidy cruelty. Names, numbers, squads, Emerald Vow, diminished, entire, standard cadres. In pieces, enough to be a backbone if the spine could bend. Heavies, gone but for 2. Assaults, 6 of 12. Jump, 4 who would fly again, 3 who would not, several who would learn to sit with chaplains until words fit their mouths. Celion added what he always adds, the thing men rely on when they are not allowed comfort. We have the measure of the distance. We will not be surprised by it again. Silent hunt, Kalen said, and Vaynar, Tyrion, Orath answered in the voice a hunting animal uses to tell itself the bones are not broken yet. Oathbound, Abriath said, and the reply was the sound a door makes when it closes because it is time. Celion lifted his helm. The hive adjusts, he said, the way a man complains about weather not yet here. Varadiel reports pressure against the wards from below. We will be listened to if we linger. We do not, Varikan replied, and the decks under his boots agreed by transmitting the Wrath's turn. The gunships climbed a stair carved from blizzard. The storm tried to put its hands over their mouths. The engines pried the fingers away and told the sky what was happening, whether it wanted to know or not. In the bays, Brother Merrick found himself rubbing the brass lion he had stolen from Kenvar's corpse until his gloves squeaked. He stopped when he realized others were watching and put his hand flat on the crate beside Teriel's hilt, as if swearing something that had not been asked. Orath, passing, grunted, "He'd have eaten yours too," and Merrick surprised himself by laughing once, cleanly, and then not again. No one argued in the mess that cycle. There was no mess, only solvent and rites. When there was, later recaf steamed uncomplained about. Sparring cages rang without shouted scripture. A jump harness hung with its insignia the right way up and no one touched it. A pair of range cartridges rested by the tie-downs, where Drennick would have plucked them with a noise of disapproval. Two brothers noticed and walked past, and then one of them doubled back and pocketed both and did not know why. They had not routed, they had not broken. They had burned and ground and left with that slight extra speed that makes truth feel honest. The book opening in the next chapter, wax and knives and oaths and new names, opened itself in their minds as the wrath found the dark between worlds and pointed at it like a spear. The spire's last gift was absence. The ship's last gift was count. Between them lay cost. And in that arithmetic, the chapter saw what must be purchased next. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 5, Scene 4, Fighting Withdrawal. Chapter 5, Scene 5 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 5, Scene 5, Aftermath aboard the Wrath. Aboard the Wrath of Angels, primary hangar and strategy sanctum. 8 hours after extraction from Kharidan. Month 10, year 260, the 41st millennium. The hangar received them like a church that kept score. Thunderhawks came in hard, nose down, engines screaming penance. Arrestor clamps bit rails with the chunk of iron hunger. The deck thrummed, bulkheads sang, the air itself shook clean of frost. Ramps yawned and did not so much lower as permit descent. What came out was not the impossible theatre the serfs imagined in their prayers. Angels arrived limping, armor glazed in rime, scripture wax crazed to white scabs, joints clotted with the black resin that clung to everything they had fought. Boots hit deck, ringing heavy and out of time. Ice husks fell from greaves in ringing plates and were kicked aside, skittering into drains like shed carapace. The smell went up and stayed. Hot oil, solvent, old incense, and the sweet metal rot of alien blood. It got into tongues and made the breath taste wrong. Servitors surged like a choir, with the voices replaced by drills. Articulated arms snaked from ceiling tracks. Clamps closed on pauldrons with a tenderness that was engineering, not affection. Hoses kissed along neck seals. Scrub fluid foamed into joints with cruel efficiency, grey froth blooming and turning black as it ate what did not belong. Where the foam did not take, tungsten brushes did. Where brushes failed, drills sang. Stand, breathe, stand. The litanist in the pit called cadence without looking at faces. Angels obeyed and flinched and obeyed again. The silent hunt were first to step clear of the exhaust haze. Kalen rolled the throttle once before killing engine, the bike's heart dying with a satisfied whoomp. He dismounted without drama, blade already half cleaned on a rag that had once been a banner edging. He passed the cloth across the teeth of his sidearm, each stroke a quiet sentence. Orath swung off laughing once under his breath, then felt the laugh recoil from the solvent air and let it die. Tyrion rode straight up the ramp line, until the tire kissed the red hash on the deck, braked at the exact mark, and set the stand as if returning a relic. Celion did not look up until his auspex coughed the ship's handshake into his ear. Then he nodded once, as if greeting an old, difficult friend who had come through. The Emerald Vow came next. Not a procession, not a mob, just the wall translated into men. Shields kissed the deck as they grounded, rims quivering. Malvin's banner swayed and found its vertical, wax flaking in curls from the tear that stopped at the lion. Varicon strode out in the center, helm under his arm now that the air was theirs. Skin paler than men remembered, a fine tracer of frost, burns across the cheek, like a map of a river with too many tributaries. Ephraim walked with both hands white on his bolter and his mouth still moving. The words had worn themselves smooth in the throat, but he did not trust silence yet. Jorath took 2 steps and found his legs had an opinion. Garen's gauntlet took his elbow and steered the opinion into good manners. Druven glanced once at the tie-down numbers painted on the deck and then away, counting without needing to see. Fragments of standard intercessor squads arrived in math the serfs hated. 3s, 4s without a sergeant, a 2 carrying a 3rd. Men with old campaign tokens soldered to their greaves now rhymed into anonymity. Someone had the presence to raise his hand to signal 5 alive. The hand shook and held, and another hand mirrored it back, which is what signals are for. The assault intercessors arrived with their noise evacuated. Chainswords silent, teeth clotted and missing, grips scuffed where gauntlets had held too tight too long. Their new sergeant's jaw was strapped out of alignment. He smiled anyway, habit or defiance or both. Brother Admund carried a snapped hilt wrapped in cloth like a relic. He placed it on a crate as he passed, not looking down because looking would have made it a ceremony. Someone else placed a tin cup beside it, dented at the lip, mess hall survivor of thousands of complaints, and walked on. The heavy intercessors returned as 2 in a stretcher. One walked stiff as statue, one lens blind and webbed, a gun carried without ammo because the hands had not yet received the message that there was nothing left to feed it. The stretcher had a tarp over it. Acid had chewed a lace through the tarp and the man's armor underneath, and the medici servitor pushed it faster when the solvent smell bit in. The 2 survivors tried to stand to attention in the wash of exhaust and couldn't. Varican's palm brushed one pauldron as he went by, a span's weight, a calibration. The heavy nodded once to no one. The jump pack intercessors landed last and wrong. Packs coughed and died in pretty blue sighs. One brother tumbled off the bay lip, and 3 hands found him before the deck could. Another touched down in a controlled fall that chipped paint and dignity, and his squad leader grunted and called it acceptable. Space where men should have been hung like gaps in teeth. A jump harness came down on a serf's shoulder. The serf staggered and righted with the stubborn speed of a man who had decided he would not die on a day when angels still needed someone to bolt their bikes to the deck. The serf's eyes were wide but not empty. One crossed himself the wrong way and did not notice. Another whispered, "Storms," and the man next to him said, "Storms don't bleed." And then, after looking at the deck, "They do today." A third, red hair, hands raw from stringing tie-downs all morning, saw Brother Kenvar's empty place and felt, idiot and sudden, the hunger that man had used to chase away fear in the mess. He swallowed it and moved on. The purgation rites began the way a fire starts, at points, then everywhere. Servitors with solvent cannons waded into the returning squads and made snow of alien residue. The fluid hissed in joints, boiling, lifting black strings out of knee seals like the ship itself were flossing teeth. Tech adepts came behind with burn wands and low fires, tracing lines over armor that smoked and squealed. They muttered Binharik like men writing a letter to a god with bad hearing. Purity seals, long lacs, were pressed fresh. Red wax ran, parchment kissed over lenses and grill teeth. The first breath a brother took cracked the seal and printed script in ice along his mouth. A watchful, hooded thing. The serfs called them watchers because no man knew what else to call them. Walked the lines. It put parchment across one helm, 2 on another, 3 on a third. Its hand was small and cold, and the wax cooled too quickly under its touch. A brother whose visor was a spiderweb of scratches bent to receive the strip and whispered thanks to a thing that did not answer. The watcher moved on. The medici rigs were iron furniture with opinions. A brother was clamped into one and rotated like a cut of meat over heat. Drones picking alien spicules from the hinge of his elbow with forceps that clicked too cheerfully. Another had half his pauldron drilled off, so the black behind it could be scrubbed. He swore twice, then swallowed the third oath when he realized Ephraim was listening. A third had plates peeled back, and a line of needle pricks run along his biceps that fizzed the blood and lifted a thin film of black to the surface like scum on stew. A servitor scraped it away with a blessed spatula, as if serving, not saving. Brother Vaynar stood long enough in solvent rain to become a monument of dull green and runoff. Celian slid a data tongue into the mast socket and watched numbers crawl across his peripheral. "Listen," he said softly. The Auspex hummed the Wrath's voice back into him. Orbital drift, bay pressure, choir tension. A low complaint from the ventral wards like a ship grinding teeth. "We're being heard," he said to Kalen, to the room, to anyone. Kalen did not answer. He was cleaning his blade with the second rag, because the first had become not a rag, but a history. Ephraim paused. Prayer cut on the stop when a servitor's solvent reached his fingers. He flexed once against the clamp and let it hold. The desire to break it passed like static. Jorath stood under a burn wand and clenched his jaw through 3 seconds. He later would count longer. Garen's hand closed over his shoulder. Weight of a man's respect, not correction. And Jorath's jaw eased because he had proof of a thing he would not admit he needed. Brother Merrick, who had stolen Kenvar's brass, found himself rubbing the token through his glove until metal squealed against leather. He stopped, embarrassed by nobody's gaze, and slid it into a pouch. Later, when rites were done, he would polish it without admitting a prayer. The choir took a breath and held it. Their voices were not for men today. They were for the ship's joints and the small places in the hull where the cold had crept too far. The sound came up through the deck and into bones. A serf's teeth rattled in time. The Wrath groaned as if correcting posture. A watcher paused before Lutherian. It lifted its little hand, stilled, then set the parchment lower than usual, just above the shield boss. The wax sealed and steamed. Lutherian looked at it and did not look away. And the crack crawling across the boss did not widen while he watched. Across the bay, a mortuary detail assembled without being asked. There are men whose hands know weights better than words. They took stretchers, tags, narrow knives for loosening armor joints. They worked with the small courtesies anyone can afford the dead. Smoothing a torn wax seal, straightening a finger, setting a helm beside a head when the two had nothing else to say to each other. They tagged Brother Lisan by his cup dent, because acid had made rank and name inscriptions into lace. They tagged Brother Corvin by the tally knife, last mark half scratched, found in a corner, as if it had walked there and laid down to rest. A mortal serf bent to lift Brother Venner's harness. The insignia plate flipped in his hand and came up the right way, the joke at last corrected by accident. He started to smile and didn't. He laid it face down on a crate and walked away. When the first rites let breath come back as not a task but a choice, a bell tolled the council. It was not a bell for victory or for funerals. It was the one the Wrath used when the ship wished to be in the room where arguments became instructions. They filed to the strategy sanctum without fuss. Armor still wet, wax still tacky, some men with solvent still in elbow crooks. The room lit low, table lit bright. The scroll lay there like a trespasser made welcome for the moment. Parchment scorched at the lips. Calibanite script crawling like frost, trying for a second life. The last line was a long, ugly curve, burnt, like a man's finger dragged through ash to draw a word he wouldn't say aloud. Melchizedek read with the slowness of the scholiast, who knows every other voice will be judged against his. The Crozius lay across his chest. The skull at its head watched the room with sockets that had stared at too much to be impressed. They abandoned their sins, he said, and each syllable arrived as if it had walked. They did not bring them to the altar. They left them for the ice, trusting cold to do the work of fire. This is cowardice. The word fell and cracked. No one stooped to gather the pieces. Athel of the Muster stood with his hands on his belt, eyes like a Barchi. Our dead will not fit on one slab, he said, but the gene vault will be busy. We have stock for seed. We have holes for names. He did not look proud at the arithmetic. He did not look ashamed. Varadil leaned into the table's light, as if he had been carved for this posture. The librarian's eyes were ringed with burst vessels, the price of holding the wards while warp light picked at them. The hive watched, he said. His voice was quiet and very tidy. It learned our rhythm and came on the beat. The spire is not just a mouth, it is an ear. The echoes were not superstition, they were rehearsal. He set 2 fingers to the burnt curve of the last line and didn't quite touch. And someone gave it a line to rehearse. Melchizedek's helm tilted a fraction. We do not chase phantoms while blood is still wet. The fallen stink of excuse. They make cowards of men with more spine than that scroll had courage to carry. His gauntlet tapped the parchment's edge. They left a confession as a decoy and fled judgment. I will not honor their timing by arguing while the rite of reckon is undone. The fallen do not excuse the swarm, Varadil said. They explain the timing. Their scent drew teeth. Our warmth held those teeth long enough to be bit. That is not indulgence. It is pattern. Pattern? Melchizedek's voice hardened, the Crozius head lifting a finger's width. Pattern is a word men use when they are too tired to hunt. We will be tired for a while, Abriath said without heat. The pattern will still be there when we wake. The air shifted. It wasn't temperature. It was the way light on metal decides to lie down. Something on the Wrath's spine groaned and relented. The sanctum listened to itself listen. Varadil did not raise his voice. He sharpened it. The hive remembers warmth. We fed it an hour of ours. It will gather. The fallen remember doors. They left one under that altar and walked away. We will not be the only ones to follow. He looked at Seraphiel last, as though acknowledging the oldest gravity in the room. We can chase every warm-blooded sin across this sector, Chaplain. Or we can close the gate they opened and salt the hinge, preferably before the swarm learns to wear a human face. Ephraim's lips moved. He had stopped praying when the solvent reached for his fingers. He found the words again now. Salt, he said, as if tasting a word that had not been in his mouth for a while. Melchizedek's Crozius came up the full span. The skull caught the table light and held it. We do not let heresy choose our timing. We don't, Varadil agreed gently enough to be rude. We let pressure and consequence do it. The room tensed. The line between shipbrother and shipbrother vibrated like a cable about to sing. Seraphiel lifted his gaze, and the argument stopped being 2 voices and became a chord. The gauntlet on his right hand flexed. The field generators murmured with a sound that has made better men polite. His face was the color of old bone and map-scarred. The bionic eye, cold star set in meat, did not blink. Enough, he said. He did not thunder it. He issued it, the way a judge issues instructions to a jury, because the law is not a debate in that room. The truth is in the script and the corpses. The truth is in what we did and what we will do. We record it. We bind it. He tapped the table once with the back of the fist. The sigils along the knuckles flared, and the scroll's ink shivered like a thing afraid of heat. We follow the line. Varadiel bowed his head a fraction. which for him was an act of friendship. Malkadek laid the Crozius down flat, which for him was trust. Athel made a note on a slate with the gravity of a man signing a marriage contract between names and graves. Outside the sanctum, a door somewhere on deck 12 opened halfway, as if it remembered another name it had been called long ago, and closed again quickly. Good manners drilled into guilt. In the librarius vault, Varadiel drew a circle that was not a circle, a geometry learned under a sky that had not felt honest since Caliban remembered trees. The circle refused to close. He left it open on purpose and called that prudence. In the hangar, the rites moved from cleansing to cataloguing to consolation people would not call comfort. Brother names were read into the log by a serf with a voice like string under tension. The list paused for corrections 3 times. The man reading swallowed after the 5th and whispered the 6th too quietly. A watcher stood next to him without touching, and the rest came out right. Servitors brought out the gene vault's silver coffers. The lids hissed as cold ate air. A tech adept raised one vial to the light, watched the motes dance, nodded, and slotted it with a care saints aren't always given. Brother Corvin's seed glowed dull as candle end. Brother Lyson's flickered, then steadied, stubborn even now. Brother Venner's read as compromised until the second test argued successfully with the machine that faith can survive, joke metal, upside down. The mess hall opened, not for food but for heat and the ritual of sitting. Men dripped solvent and old blood on benches. No one complained about recaf temperature. A servitor poured, and the steam made halos over cups. Someone started to speak a sparring psalm in Brother Teriel's cadence, stopped halfway through the first line, and owned the quiet that followed. A jump harness hung on a peg with its insignia, the right way up for the first time. No one smiled. A glove touched it in passing, and then brushed the thigh, as if to wipe off the memory of doing so. 2 cartridges lay by the tie-downs. They had rolled there during embark under the lick of downwash, and stayed because men had been busy living. Sergeant Drennick would have hated them. A standard brother saw them, stepped over them, stopped, stepped back, picked both, pocketed one, pressed the other into the palm of his squad mate, as if giving him a coin to buy forgiveness. The squad mate nodded and did not speak. He would put it on a shelf by his bunk later and remove dust from it when he could not sleep. The choir found the note they had been hunting inside the hull. For a minute, the wrath vibrated at a frequency that made teeth ache but nerves settle. Her machine spirit was not pleased tonight. It was professional. The mortals whispered names. Lisan and the mess laughed soft without joy. Kenvar and someone unconsciously pushed a tray toward a gap as if ready to share. Teriel and a sparring cage rang empty. Venner and a hand drew a small upside-down aquila on a scrap of rag and then tucked it away because mockery belongs to the living. Drennick and the range servitors would be disciplined for leaving brass, even though the fault was men not yet remembering to do it for themselves. Sorrel and a regicide board sat unflipped. The Oathbound stood in the nave of the armory and said nothing in unison. Dominiel oiled Mortalicida's chain with a cloth that left dark commas on the studs. Lutherian set his shield on a bench and sat across from it and watched the crack wander to the exact place it had earlier and no further. Zephanis laughed once where no one could hear and didn't again. Ramiel put his gauntlets on the floor and pressed his palms together until the pressure made pleasant pain in ligaments that had petitioned him all day. Abriath wrote a column of numbers by hand, twice, threw the first page in the brazier, and watched it fail to burn. He took that as a joke only he was permitted to enjoy. Kalen took his cleaned blade to the shrine of the lion. He set it across the rail, knelt with the bare minimum of theatre, and let the weight of his head decide how long it would rest. Orath leaned in the doorway like a man who had always meant to be passing through, and had just remembered he wasn't. Tyrion took the time to clean the bike's tire studs with a small awl, and a patience he did not own elsewhere. Celion's auspex still hummed the ship's drift in his ear, and the number soothed nothing and everything. At the end of count, the ledger was read in council again because writing it once is arithmetic, and writing it twice makes it truth. Heavy intercessors, Athel said. 2 living, 1 critical, the rest to vault. A nod, no faces named, because faces had been removed already, and names would come later when wax and knives had been properly introduced to grief. Assaults. 6 of 12 breathing air you can call air. The rest to vault or to book. His slate tapped once on the table, a click that remembered ribs breaking. Jump. 4 fit to fly with a text blessing, 3 to cages until the medica decide what gravity means to their bones now. Another click. Standard, fragments, enough to form 2 full files from 5 if pride is not consulted. Varican's palm found the banner's pole and planted it in the socket carved into the deck for exactly that purpose. The sound went up through the metal, through boots, through teeth. It felt like something being decided. We did not rout, he said. He did not look at Malkadek when he said it. He did not look at Varadil. He looked at the map slate sunward, then inward. We will not pretend we did not hurry. No, Seraphiel said without rebuke. We will not pretend. He looked at the scroll and then away. The bionic eye clicked focus on a detail no one else could see, a wavering in the ink where heat had teased meaning and left reluctance. Seal this, he told Malkadek, and the chaplain nodded and set the Crozius's head to the parchment's margin, pressing until a new seal took hold. Not to sanctify, not to forgive, but to make a record that would not slip away when someone's hands grew warm. Varadil turned to go and paused at the door, because some theatre is not indulgence, but instruction. The ear will still be there, he said. When we return, it will know a better song. Malchadek's hood did not move. Then we will teach it silence. Across the spine of the ship, lights flickered. 3, then 9, then steady, as the power grid rerouted around a hungry section. Somewhere deep, a pump coughed as if swallowing a word it ought not say. A door on deck 9 paused midway before it opened, then decided to finish the motion, as though a hand had made the choice on its behalf. The Wrath was listening to herself, and did not like what she heard. The last work of the cycle was small and heavy. A serf with a voice like string read names in the mess. Each name called returned a response. Present, absent, to the vault, to the book. When he said Drennick, no one answered. A brother stood and reached in his pocket and put a single shell casing on the table, and that was answer enough. In the dark corridor between the sanctum and the librarius, a watcher stood very still. If it breathed, the parchment strips in its hands did not move. It turned its head as if a noise had approached from a wall. There was no noise. It laid one strip on the door frame and went away. The Wrath turned for the dark, as if the dark had asked politely. Engines throbbed a patient threat. The choir let their held note down like a blade. The ship's bones settled around the number of brothers they still contained, and the number of brothers they now carried as seed and as story. In the racks, a jump harness hung the right way up. In a cage, a sparring mat waited for a man who would not shout scripture at it. In the range, 2 cartridges had found pockets and would be cleaned until the brass reflected names. In the shrine, Kalen lifted his head and collected his blade. In the sanctum, the scroll cooled under a new seal. In the vault, Varadil's circle refused to be a circle, and that was deliberate. They had not broken. They had burned. Then they had ground. They had left with that slight extra speed, that makes truth feel honest. The last thing the ship offered them before sleep was a held breath. The last thing they offered her was count. Between those two there is duty. Beyond it, a door. Someone had left it cracked once. It would be closed. For now, the wrath of angels carried her silence like a weapon and listened for the next confession waiting in blood. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 5, Scene 5, Aftermath aboard the Wrath. Chapter 6, Scene 1 follows.